Video update from Yerevan, Armenia on this Saturday afternoon, July 15th. Let's talk about some news. And right now I am at Republic Square, which is the main square here in downtown Yerevan. Right in front of me is the National Gallery Museum, the Museum of History, right there. And it's a very hot, beautiful Saturday afternoon here in Yerevan. So let's talk about Tucker Carlson. that's an interesting segue to discussing Tucker Carlson, who is making a lot of news, made a lot of news over the past couple of days. There's the story from the Wall Street Journal that Tucker Carlson, along with his college roommates, they're going to be starting a media company. And it's going to be short form and long form videos. It's going to work on a subscription basis. But there's also going to be a lot of free content that Tucker Carlson is going to publish on various social media platforms like Twitter. This bench is not bolted down, so it's moving a bit. But that's interesting news that Tucker Carlson's going to be creating a media company / platform, which will be very successful. I'm positive of it. But the main story with Tucker Carlson from the other day was this GOP leadership event that took place, sponsored by The Blaze, that took place a couple of days ago, yesterday, and I believe the day before. And Tucker Carlson, he was moderating this event, which had all of the Republican Party presidential hopefuls, well, except for Trump. I think Trump was not at this event, but everyone else was there, from DeSantis to Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, Tim Scott. They were all there at this leadership event, and Tucker Carlson interviewed all of them. And boy, did Tucker Carlson destroy a lot of presidential aspirations for these Republican presidential hopefuls. And he didn't really have to do much to destroy their hope to becoming the president of the United States, or winning the candidacy, the Republican candidacy for the November 2024 election. All Tucker Carlson had to really do was ask them about Ukraine, and their response to Tucker's questions about Ukraine and what they would do if they were president, how they would handle Project Ukraine, disqualified most of these Republican candidates. And it really did expose how clueless these guys are when pressed about Project Ukraine. And we can start things off with Tim Scott. When Tucker Carlson asked Tim Scott about Project Ukraine, Scott basically said that he would put no boots on the ground in Ukraine, but the U.S. policy to use Ukraine in order to destroy Russia and diminish Russia's military was the correct policy. And Tim Scott actually believes that Russia's military is being destroyed and degraded. He actually believes that this policy from the Biden White House in order to use Ukraine as a proxy against Russia is actually working, and Russia's military is being degraded. He actually called Russia, or he branded Russia, Iran, and China as a new axis of evil. So Tim Scott did not do too well when he was asked about Ukraine. Nikki Haley, when she was asked about Ukraine and specifically the Nord Stream pipeline and the fact that the United States apparently blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, blew up the critical infrastructure of their most important ally in Europe, that being Germany, Nikki Haley was silent. She really had no reply for that question from Tucker Carlson, and Nikki Haley didn't do too bad, to be quite honest. Being quiet was probably the best move that she could have made when Tucker asked her about the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline. When he asked Asa Hutchinson about Project Ukraine, Hutchinson just completely ignored the question on Ukraine and just talked about Taiwan and how the United States should prepare for conflict with Taiwan. He's like, I don't even want to discuss Project Ukraine. Let's talk about Taiwan and Project Taiwan in order to ramp up for conflict with China. And then you had DeSantis. DeSantis, when he was asked about Project Ukraine and what he would do if he were president with Ukraine, DeSantis said that the U.S. would not get involved or was too involved in Project Ukraine, and this should really be something that Europe takes care of, that the EU member states handle, not knowing that the EU member states are 100% dependent on the United States. So I'm not sure how DeSantis sees all of this working, how he sees the United States just passing this off 100% to the European Union, but that was his answer. The European Union should be handling Ukraine. The EU, which is out of money and out of weapons and 100% dependent on the United States, that should be the policy of a DeSantis White House. That would be the policy of a DeSantis White House. And then we had the best one, which was Mike Pence. Boy, oh boy, did Tucker Carlson destroy Mike Pence's presidential aspirations. Well, Mike Pence destroyed his own presidential aspirations. And when he was asked about Project Ukraine and how the U.S. is sinking all kinds of money and weapons and tanks into Ukraine while U.S. cities are falling apart, Mike Pence told Tucker Carlson, that's none of my concern. The cities in the United States are not my concern. So like Pence was telling Tucker Carlson how he's all for escalation and giving more weapons and more tanks and more money to the Zelensky regime. And Tucker was like, yeah, but you know, Mr. Pence, the United States is crumbling. You know, we need the money. We need to fix up our cities. We need to fix up our infrastructure. Why are we sending all of this money to a corrupt Zelensky regime? And Pence was like, you know, the U.S. cities, that's not my concern. What is my concern is Ukraine. That was it. His presidential run is over. At least he said the truth. You got to hand it to Pence. At least he spoke the truth, which is that all of these GOP candidates have no interest in fixing the United States or putting America first. Their only interest is in Ukraine. Well, Trump, of course, he wasn't at this event, but I'm sure that Trump would have answered Tucker Carlson's questions with a proper response, a proper reply, which would be, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine, and I'm going to focus on America. It's that simple. That's your answer. When Tucker Carlson asks you about Project Ukraine, your answer is, I'm going to end the war via negotiations. I'm going to stop funding Zelensky. I'm going to tell him to negotiate with Putin, and I'm going to end this thing, and then I'm going to focus on America. That's it. It's that simple. It is that simple. I'm so shocked that these GOP candidates that were at this leadership forum, that they knew Tucker Carlson's position on Ukraine, and no one on their team prepped them. I don't know. That would have been Trump's reply if he was at this event, if Tucker Carlson were to ask Trump about Project Ukraine. 100% guaranteed. That's what Trump would have answered. Vivek Ramaswamy. He was good. He was the one outlier in all of this, but everyone else, they imploded. They really, really imploded. On a very simple question, how would you handle Ukraine? A very easy question. And they all messed up because they can't bring themselves to say that they would negotiate with Russia. They just can't say it. They can't bring themselves to say it. Or maybe the military-industrial complex that sponsors these candidates has told them not to say it. That's probably what's going on. So there was another presidential hopeful interview, this time on the left, and that was Cornell West's interview with CNN. Now, Cornell West, he's running as an independent, and I believe he's seeking the nomination for the Green Party ticket. But he was on CNN, and he was speaking to what's her name? The reporter that absolutely despises Trump. Caitlin Collins, I believe is her name. And when she asked Cornell West what he would do with Project Ukraine, well, Cornell West hit it out of the park. He said the right answer. He said, I would negotiate. And CNN asks him, well, how would you do that? How would you solve the Ukraine problem? He's like, well, I would get China, and I would get Russia, and I would get the United States, and all of these countries. I would get them to sit at the table, the negotiating table, and I would wind this thing down. And he's honest about it. He's like, look, there's going to be concessions that are going to have to be made. Ukraine is going to lose territory, but people are going to stop dying, and we're going to end this conflict. And when he said that Ukraine was going to have to make concessions, the fake left, they went crazy on Twitter. I mean, they went crazy. How dare you, Cornell West? How dare you speak with such a realistic view of things? How dare you see things in a realistic light? And they're like, Ukraine is never going to give up territory. There's going to be no concessions. And of course, they rolled out the Putin stooge, Putin puppet, Putin troll narrative that they always brand everyone who says that they're going to negotiate an end to the Ukraine crisis, and it's going to have to be a realistic end. And Cornell West, during the interview with CNN, he actually said that people are now going to say that I'm pro-Putin or something like that. The minute he said that he's going to solve this, he's going to negotiate this out with other countries, and there's going to be concessions that are going to have to be made, he's like, this doesn't make me a Putin troll. So he actually knew that they're going to brand him as that. And that's exactly what they did. They don't want to argue him on his points. They don't want to argue his policy for Ukraine because they know he has the right policy. What they do is they just automatically call him a Putin troll. They fall back on the Putin stooge moniker. So that was an interesting couple of days of interviews and the leadership summit and hearing from all of the presidential candidates, the presidential hopefuls, Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They've got the right policy for Ukraine, and Cornell West, absolutely, Cornell West as well. So after the NATO summit, it does look like the collective West is in a bit of a panic with Project Ukraine, because the NATO summit, I think it exposed much of the world, or at least the world that is watching, to the fact that Ukraine has lost. NATO has lost, and the collective West, they need some sort of off-ramp, because Project Ukraine has turned, has turned into a disaster for NATO, for the US, for the EU. And that's what the NATO summit exposed to the world that is watching. And now you see a lot of damage control from the collective West. And yesterday there was a presentation from I think the new Air Force, the RAF Air Force commander, Richard Knighton. And in this presentation, which reminded me of it was kind of like a very cheap Apple developer event. You know, it's like this guy standing in front of a big screen. It's like a low budget Apple developer event. And he's standing behind this big screen, and he's giving his pitch, his sales pitch. And this RAF commander, this new RAF commander, he said that the UK Air Force, the Royal Air Force, is ready to fly and fight with the Russian aerospace forces. And he also said that Russia is going to lose, or would potentially lose, to a fight with the Royal Air Force. Now, this was part of a much bigger presentation, and what I'll do is I'll actually put the link to this presentation down below, or maybe I'll even play it in this video. Let me see what I'll do in post-production. But he wasn't, to be fair to this commander, he wasn't like making a statement, at least the way I read it, the way I saw it. He wasn't like making a statement, you know, we're going to send our aircraft to Ukraine and we're going to take on the Russians, and if and when we do take on the Russian Air Force, they're going to lose big time. That wasn't what he was saying. He was just kind of making a sales pitch for more money into the UK military industrial complex. That's kind of what he was doing. And his argument, his justification for more investment and more money was that the Russian military has been weakened. At least the Russian army, the ground forces, he said, have been weakened. I think he said something like 2/3 or 1/3 of the Russian military has been annihilated in Ukraine. So they've suffered a huge, catastrophic defeat in Ukraine. I don't know where he's pulling this from, but I actually do know where he's pulling this from. He's pulling this from the Discord leaks. Remember the Discord leaks, which had some sort of policy paper which said that Russia's military had been degraded by something like 90% in Ukraine. And Ben Wallace repeated this, and now it looks like this is now common thinking in the British command. But he said, look, the Russian ground force is vanished. It's half of it is gone, or 1/3 of it is gone. But the Russian Air Force, he said, that's intact. That remains strong. So what we need to do is we need to put more focus on the Royal Air Force, put more money into the Royal Air Force, and we can deter Russia from using its Air Force, or if need be, we can engage with the Russian Air Force and defeat the Russian Air Force. It was like a sales pitch that he was making. So that was an interesting presentation. And then we had the Washington Post. They're trying to deal with the NATO panic, the NATO summit, Vilnius panic fallout, by trotting out Zaluzhny in an interview. Not a video interview, but an article interview of Zaluzhny. So Zaluzhny still hasn't appeared in some sort of a video or TV interview yet, but they interviewed Zaluzhny on Project Ukraine, and he had some interesting things to say. If this was indeed the real Zaluzhny, it does look like Zaluzhny fell out of favor with Zelensky. They marginalized him for 4 or 5 weeks. And then as the counteroffensive, they blamed Nord Stream on Zaluzhny as well. And then as the big counteroffensive got underway and it failed, they brought Zaluzhny back. That seems to be what they're doing. And in this interview from the Washington Post, let me cross right here, get in the shade, and I'll read you what Zaluzhny said. Pretty nice square, actually a very nice downtown here in Yerevan. So in this interview, Zaluzhny, he promised that he's going to take Crimea. So he made that promise. He said, as soon as I have the funds, I will do something. I don't give a damn. No one will stop me. In order to save my people, why should I ask anyone for permission what to do in enemy territory? Somehow I must think I'm not allowed to do anything there. Why? Because Putin will use nuclear weapons? Dying children don't care. This is our problem, and it is up to us to decide how to kill the enemy. If our partners are afraid to use weapons, we will kill with our own, but only as much as you need. So he's going to take Crimea. He's basically saying to the collective West via the Washington Post, if you don't give us the weapons we need, well, then we're going to use our own weapons or make our own weapons to defeat Russia. And then he also said, he made an interesting admission. I guess it's an admission in a way. According to Zaluzhny, he gets around the Western restrictions for weapons, the Western restrictions on weapons, by using weapons made in Ukraine for strikes across the border, while official Kiev pretends they did not happen. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry only recently admitted to last October's truck bombing of the Crimean Bridge, for example. So, in a way, Zaluzhny, he kind of admits that he's the one behind not only Nord Stream, he's the one behind the attacks against Belgorod, the terrorist attacks on Russian territory, the drone strikes maybe at the Kremlin. That's Zaluzhny's admission. So he did Nord Stream, and he's also the one behind the attacks on Russian territory as well, according to the Washington Post, according to this interview. And the Washington Post, they describe Zaluzhny as the man Ukrainians trust to keep them safe and Western partners trust with billions in security assistance. He's the man. He's the man. And so they brought him out so he can make the case for more weapons and more escalation. And if he doesn't get the weapons and the escalation, well, then Ukraine will find a way to get the weapons and the escalation. And then he said that he's the guy that's behind all of the attacks on Russian territory. So, you know, if and when this war winds down, and if and when the Russians are victorious, Zaluzhny's going to have a lot to answer for, a whole lot to answer for. Anyway, that was the interview with Zaluzhny. And should we do one more story before I get to my clown world? So the New York Times, they're running an article where they say that the cluster munitions that are being provided to Ukraine, and they're already in Ukraine, by the way, the cluster munitions are already being used by the Ukraine military. The New York Times is saying that officials that they've interviewed believe that the cluster munitions are not going to really have an effect on the conflict. on the war. And these officials that the New York Times interviewed, they basically admitted that the cluster munitions are just being used to buy time for the Ukraine military and for the collective West so that they can produce the 155 ammo that they need. That's basically it. I'm gonna cross here. So that was quite an admission from the New York Times and from these anonymous officials. That's gonna be loud, that beep. That is gonna be loud. But yeah, so the cluster munitions, they're not gonna make a difference in this conflict, and all that the collective West is doing by sending these cluster munitions is they're trying to buy Ukraine time for them to produce the ammunition that they need, which won't be enough because Russia outproduces all of the ammunition production, not only from the European Union, but the European Union and the US combined, and Russia outproduces by a lot. So that was an interesting article from the New York Times, and what a cool street. And let's do a clown world and we'll wrap this video up. There's another story about China and Germany. So Germany, they came out with like another policy doctrine, another policy report where they're saying that China is a risk to Germany, and Germany needs to move away from trade with China, even though China is Germany's number one trade partner. And Olaf Scholz, he's now saying that Germany has to be focused on moving away from China because China is an enemy. That is according to Olaf Scholz. So let's walk this way. Let's see what's down there as we do a clown world. I think I have a quote from Olaf. He said something really interesting about his new China strategy, and China was very upset. They're basically saying what Germany is doing is stupid. It's not going to work, and it's only going to damage Germany, and they shouldn't be seeing China as the enemy. But the Olaf Scholz government, I guess they figure, we've destroyed Germany quite a lot by going along with Project Ukraine and cutting off Russia with EU sanctions. So we might as well just finish the job by moving away from China. And I'm trying to see if I have this quote from Olaf. Here, you guys can see the street as I walk and look for this quote. Here we go. Commenting on the strategy, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the goal was not to disconnect from the Chinese economy, but merely to avoid critical dependencies in the future. He added that his administration must respond to Beijing's more offensive stance in recent years, calling for a new framework for relations. Beijing's offensive stance. I'm still trying to figure out, what has China done to Germany? Like nothing. Interesting statement from Olaf Scholz. And let's do a quick clown world, and we will wrap this video up. And let's talk about, how about Macron during the Bastille Day parade getting booed by everybody. Macron was booed by everybody on Bastille Day.
politique, et le président évidemment en tête, est-ce qu'il y a des...
On entend des huées, et parmi les applaudissements, il y a, et puis Pierre, vous le soulignez, ainsi qu'Anne-Claire, cela fait très longtemps.
Boy, that did not look good for Macron. And, I have one more. Here's one more clown world that came to my mind. So, Ukraine, they're in the process of legalizing cannabis, or they've already legalized cannabis. And so they came out with a statement the other day, and they said that when they capture Crimea, they're going to actually make Crimea, they're going to turn Crimea into a cannabis growing region. So I thought that was interesting. When they capture Crimea, Crimea is going to be a cannabis hub, a cannabis growing hub for Ukraine when they capture Crimea, which will be never. Anyway, that's the video, everybody. It is really hot, and I can't go on for any longer. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, Telegram, and Rock Fame. And go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.